In the Unpacking Scholarship episodes, I like to share like lingering questions and thoughts at the end of the episode. Like, here's something that just kind of popped into my head while reading this. I forget which paper it was, but one of them, I was wondering out loud, at what point is it a form of like, I don't know, epistemological or ontological or axiological colonization? So colonizing ways of knowing, being, valuing, etc. when we look at some of that data. And so the thing that like really just randomly popped in my head one day was, well, there likely are not a lot of Amish people who are getting degrees in computer science. If we are trying to increase that percentage, is that then a form of colonization in terms of changing their ways of being and valuing, etc.? And at what point does that happen with other cultures other than that a very extreme example right there?
Yeah.
And so some of that has been talked about with like, well, why are certain genders in fields and not in others, etc. And yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of me thinking out loud, like, it's a fascinating, there's so many different intersectional things and cultural things to consider, like when it comes to any kind of data like that.
Totally. And so, and yeah, this is going back to Andy DeSessa, like he was really upset with the term computational thinking. And part of the reason was he felt that, and NetV talks about this too, is that like we tend to equate computational literacy with computer science as a field. Mm-hmm. And he calls this kind of like a cultural imperialism where computer science, it's a scientific discipline. It's an engineering discipline. It values efficiency and correctness and writing neat and tidy comments and being all of these things that go along with kind of scientific disciplines. But that's not why I fell in love with coding.
Right.
Like I fell in love with coding for the craft of it, for the creative part of it. Like, and it kind of this idea of like, well, if we started to have different genres of computational literacy, then this kind of your point about like, okay, well, who gets to decide? And are we just like inviting, are we trying to invite other people into our dominant culture? Mm-hmm. As opposed to saying like, maybe we should be open to people, reinventing computational literacy ideas on their own terms. And so we've also been kind of playing around with ideas of subversive literacy. So if you like I tend to think of like the birth of hip hop is kind of like a subversion of dominant forms of literacy, dominant musical paradigms, dominant paradigms of dance. It was sort of rejecting the academy and saying like, what, we're just going to reinvent this on our own terms, right? And I think you look at jazz, you look at blues, like a lot of the sort of musical genres that grew out of the Black American experience. I think that those are really, really interesting examples of subversions of literacy to sort of reclaim power, reclaim identity. And like, what would a subversion of computational literacy look like that sort of rejects the sort of the cultural imperialism of like computer science? This is Andy DeSessa's terminology, but so I think your example, like that's what it makes me think about.
Yeah, that's interesting. This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast was from episode 189, which is titled Computational Literacies with Michael Horn. You can listen to this episode as well as hundreds more by simply searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app.